we've seen circulating, online in some print articles and things like that, people now trying to make a distinction because once again, I mean, it's amazing how easy it is for this to happen. No matter how much you think, no, this time that's not going to happen. This can't happen this time. It's amazing how anti-war people can so easily be branded as pro whoever the U.S. opponent is at the time, whether it's Saddam Hussein, whether it's Al Qaeda, whether it's the Soviet Union, or now whether it's Vladimir Putin. There was just an article out in Jacobin that sort of directly confronted that. I forget the guy who wrote it, and I'm actually glad I forget the guy who wrote it because I didn't think it was a good article even. But I do want to just look into the very simple question. So I won't go long here. I just have a couple of points that I would just like to raise. Very, very simple questions I would like to raise at people who don't think that we are like sufficiently anti-Putin or anti-Russia, right? What does it mean? What does it mean to be anti-Putin? What does it mean to be anti-Russia in this? I am happy, if people need to hear it, to condemn Vladimir Putin and to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. I'm perfectly happy to do that. I could do that all night if you want. We saw pictures of newborn babies being treated in underground bunkers because the Ukrainian hospitals they didn't feel were safe enough. So, of course, that's an atrocious thing to witness. And, of course, it's very easy to say, yes, I fully condemn the person who's most directly responsible for putting people in that horrible situation. In this case, that's Vladimir Putin. I'm perfectly happy to say that. I have absolutely no issue with saying that whatsoever. The reason I am not going to emphasize that point for the next hour is because I don't believe in this case that condemning Vladimir Putin is actually a political statement. It is an emotional expression. And I feel like, especially in the age of social media, in the age of online activism, people tend to mistake emotional expression for political engagement. Saying Vladimir Putin is a terrible person is an expression of an emotional sentiment. It's one I happen to agree with, but it's not political engagement and it's not real political analysis. Political engagement has to do with analyzing the reality of the situation and figuring out how to pursue the best outcome, or in this case, probably a more apt way of putting it, how to pursue the least worst outcome, the least harmful outcome. And so the question in this situation is not, is Vladimir Putin a bad person? It's how could we have avoided war? I am anti-war before I am anti-Putin. I'm anti-war first. I'm anti-violence, anti-killing, anti-bombing first before I am anti-Putin. Now, what does that mean? In this case, you have to recognize that the way to avoid war, the way to avoid this invasion seems to me was capitulation to Vladimir Putin's demands for a neutral Ukraine. Now, how do I know that? Well, it's very easy to know that. We know that based on Joe Biden's own words. We heard from the Biden administration two things at the same time. We heard, number one, there will be harsh consequences for Russia if they invade Ukraine. And number two, we fully expect Russia to invade Ukraine. And so if you're saying simultaneously, you're going to pay a price for doing this, but we expect you to do it anyway, that's not real diplomacy. That's offering someone $50 for a gold coin they're trying to get 10 grand for and calling it real diplomacy. It's not real diplomacy because you're going in fully expecting it to fail. And so the question is, did the United States do everything in its power to prevent this war, to prevent this bloodshed? And I don't think anyone can tell me, yes, they did. If you can, I would love to hear from you. I would love to hear someone challenge me on that point. Now, if you are of the opinion that in the end, this is going to work out lousily for Russia and that maybe the world will be a better place at the end of this because we didn't capitulate, okay. I don't really see the path to that happening. But even if you're right about that, what you're saying is that the invasion of Ukraine was a price you were willing to pay for a potential better outcome down the road. It means you were not willing to do everything possible to stop this bloodshed in the first place, which, in my opinion, makes you less anti-war than I am. You might be more anti-Putin than I am, but you're not more anti-war than I am. You're not as appalled by this invasion as I am, because I wanted the United States to do everything in its power to stop it. And apparently you didn't. All right, that's my opening speech. Russell, if you found any holes in that you want to poke, please, because I honestly would like to have someone challenge me on this, because I feel a little crazy. I don't know what I have wrong. I don't know what about that doesn't make sense to people, but apparently a lot of it doesn't.
No, you speak very eloquently, comrade.
I knew you were going to fucking do. I knew that was coming.
You are very clear in your principles, and I think very correct.
I knew that was coming.
Yeah, you set yourself up for that. Something that I think also some people. Okay, all right. Well, let me take on a couple things here. One, a lot of people on the left, on the online left, who I personally feel usually get things right, did get this very wrong. And for example, Matt Taibbi, and if you go back to the Wayback Machine, I actually mentioned a few episodes ago when Taibbi dropped this article about, mocking the media for jumping on the assessment that Russia was going to go into Ukraine on Wednesday. I said that wasn't going to age well, that article wouldn't age well. And indeed, Taibbi just sent out a mea culpa email about that article specifically, because it was your typical kind of Taibbi article going after the media, going after the intelligence agencies, which
let me just show the audience very quickly on what you're talking about. You're talking about the fact that we heard that Russia was going to invade, and a lot of people saw that initial sort of semi-pullback as an indication that the media had got it wrong again.
Right.
Okay.
I myself personally felt that was a bad take, that Russia did not move that amount of material and men to not go in. I felt that this was really picking the wrong moment to mock the gullibility of the intelligence agencies and the media. I felt that was going to blow up in their faces, and it did blow up in a lot of faces. Hey, breaking points. They're usually on point. Sager and Jetty did a mea culpa on this. He was another one who was mocking he's not going to go in. It's true. A lot of the online left did not take it as seriously as they should have. Now, I understand why that is, because, come on, I mean, we've gone through years of these intelligence agencies just drumming up narratives and the media just dutifully parroting them. But that's the danger to getting, and it's human nature. It's very difficult to maintain a flexible perspective. It's part of our it's part of our equipment. It's part of what we inherit from evolution, right? You want to save time. You don't want to think through every new situation on its own merits. So our brains are kind of designed to shortcut through that process and think, I've seen this before, so this is the same as what I saw last time. But I think that's the danger of becoming set in a way, or becoming knee-jerk, right? Like everyone just said, intelligence agencies, media, and nobody looked at, motherfucker, the guy is like pulling the whole Russian army up to the border of Ukraine. Doesn't matter what you think of the media or the intelligence agencies. I wasn't even looking at that. Personally, I was not listening to the media reports. I was looking at what he was doing.
what he was doing, and also the fact that
that's all
he
I
had the
needed to know.
stronger hand. He had the stronger hand to play.
Well, it was just common sense. And also, okay, why would he do this now? The West has runaway inflation. Gas prices are through the roof. The West is in the weakest position that it's ever going to be in to deal with the backlash of sanctions. And indeed, none of the sanctions they're discussing, even now, are touching his oil and gas. He correctly calculated this is, if there was ever a time to do this, this is the time. It's now or never. The West will never be in a weaker position. However, I myself was a little premature because on Friday, the stock market was just crazy because it was collapsing in the morning, or I think that was Thursday actually. And once Biden announced the sanctions, it went through the roof because they weren't touching the sanctions that would really hurt Russia, disconnecting Russia's banks from SWIFT, which is the system that underlies international trade, or going after the oil and gas. Now, I wrote an article for us for our podcast mentioning, well, Wall Street didn't have to worry, and certainly it just enormous. NASDAQ had its biggest swing since November 2008, from 3% down to 3.4% up once Biden announced his sanctions, because they were like, oh, that's not really going to affect anything. But over the weekend, and we'll see what they finally come up with, but the EU and the US have gotten together and agreed to disconnect. This is where the devil is in the details, quote unquote, certain Russian banks from SWIFT. So I want to know what that means before I say that they've really reversed the policy and they're really going to go all in on that. But it looks like they're going to do it, which was being described as an economic nuclear option only days ago. Russia has said they would consider it an act of war if they were disconnected from SWIFT. So they are taking it to that point. I will say, I think there have been a lot of bad takes on this. I do think a lot of the left, and I'm not really talking about your take particularly. I think there were a lot of people who didn't think this was going to happen, or just reacted to it very reflexively. In terms of what you've been saying about the West avoiding this, that touches on something else. And again, I don't think you really got into this. Some people wanted to blame Biden. I don't blame Biden. I don't blame him. This is 30 years in the making. This is a terrible mishandling of the Cold War finally come home to roost. Biden is the schmuck who, as with so many other things going on in the world right now, kind of got dropped in the middle of a lot of crap that he's not personally responsible for. Some things he is. We talk about prison sentencing and things like that, but or the student loan epidemic, he's personally responsible for. But when you talk about this goes back to the way we handled the post-Cold War. This goes all the way back to Russia has a brutal, horrible history. They went from being brutalized by the czars to being brutalized by the party. There was a brief window there. There was a brief window where Russia could have become essentially part of Europe, where Russia, there was a path there where Russia would have been an EU nation. I mean, that sounds crazy now, but there was a moment there. There was a moment. And instead of treating Russia like a respected ally, we treated them like a satellite. We propped up drunk disaster Boris Yeltsin. We put American money into Russia in their election, interfered, propped up the deeply unpopular Yeltsin, actually sent our own political operatives and consultants into Russia to work on Yeltsin's campaign. What signal did this send to the Russian people? Well, they're never going to treat us as an ally. They're going to treat us like a South American country. They're going to treat us like a satellite. They're going to treat us like a vassal. That opened the door to the Russian people doing what they've always done. They rallied behind a strong man to defend the honor and the integrity of Russia. You combine that with, and hey, these countries like Poland and Lithuania and Ukraine, they fucking hate Russia. Russia, predating the Soviet Union, Russia has been invading those countries and forcing them into a greater Russian empire that they never really wanted to be a part of. So it's not surprising that those countries, once they had the opportunity, would want to align themselves with the West. That's getting away from your abusive ex-boyfriend, right? You're gonna go for somebody who's going to protect you from that. In terms of our strategic interest, or Europe's or the West's strategic interest, that was something that perhaps should have been better considered, because Russia historically has been very sensitive about what goes on in those regions, because invasions into Russia have always come from that direction. They've always been invaded over their western border. So yes, maybe you could have had them join the EU. You didn't need to incorporate them necessarily into NATO. And with Ukraine specifically, I agree with your argument, but I think it long predates it getting to this. We could have told them a long time ago, no, we're not going to incorporate that into NATO. Now there's no debate that James Baker told Gorbachev that we would not move 1 inch towards Russia, that NATO would not expand. Now they're trying to muddy it up and say, oh no, we just meant Germany, which doesn't even make any sense. Like, why would Germany move further?
No.
Like the West has an interest in backing a German expansion into Russia. We have bad memories of that kind of thing. So that cover story doesn't even make any sense. Like, the West is trying to backpedal and say, no, we didn't say that, or okay, we did say it, but we didn't mean that. Yes, we did lay the groundwork for what's happening now to be happening. So to just, Putin is a scumbag, but you're right, this didn't have to happen.
Okay, but when I say didn't have to happen, go ahead, finish up.
30 years of history.
I'll let you finish.
That doesn't encompass the last month of history. That encompasses going back to 1989.
Sure. And so if you want to take the broad historical view and assign blame, of course you can assign the lion's share of blame coming at it from that perspective to Joe Biden. But I will give an example that I gave last week that I didn't really get to finish.
Well, I'm not assigning the blame to Joe Biden.
No. I right. That's what you said earlier. And you gave an example of why, if you zoom out and look at the 30-year history here, you can't really pin the blame historically on Joe Biden. Here's why I'm a little angrier at Joe Biden than a lot of people are for this, though. Because all that history being what it is, you're in a situation, and I made this comparison last week, and I only got about 30 seconds into it because it was a hectic show. We were all screaming and excited, and, so I didn't get to finish this. All right. If you're a teller at a bank and a guy comes in with a machine gun and says, everybody in the bank on your knees, hands where I can see him. He points the gun at the teller and he says, empty the drawer. I want every last dollar in the drawer. If we're going to make an analogy to this situation, you would say Putin is the guy with the gun coming in, robbing the bank. He is the aggressor in this situation. He is the villain in this situation. There's no question about that. However, Joe Biden or NATO or the West, right? They are the teller in that situation. And the teller in that situation has a profound moral decision to make. The profound moral decision is, do I tell this bank robber, fuck you, what's ours is ours, come and take it? Or does he say, okay, take what's in the drawer and leave everybody in here alone. Don't kill anyone. That's the moral decision that the West, Joe Biden, NATO had to make here. And so they are not broadly speaking, responsible for this whole situation in historical terms. But in the moment, they had to make a decision. How do we handle this situation? Do we handle this in a way that minimizes death, or do we handle this in a way that upholds our values, which we sufficiently got into last week? What a ridiculous statement that is in the first place, right? But you're the president, you're an executive, you have a moral decision to make here. You have a situation where, whether it's your fault, whether it's Putin's fault, whether it's Russia's fault, whether it's the West's fault, right, whether it's James Baker's fault for making a bad promise, you're in a situation here where a guy's got a gun to your head and is going to kill a bunch of people unless you cooperate. And you're in a weak spot. You're in a weak spot for a number of reasons, many of which, like I would totally grant you, are not the fault of Joe Biden himself. But you're in a situation there, in a tense situation there, where you are the executive having to make a profound moral decision. And in my opinion, they made the wrong one, because they said two things at the same time. Number one, there are going to be consequences if you do this. Number two, we fully expect you to do this, which means that wasn't a real diplomatic engagement.
I agree that they should have sat down and done what they did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, man. I mean, they did work out a deal. Like this is the part of this that usually is not emphasized in American tellings of the conclusion of that. Russia pulled its missiles out of Cuba, and we pulled our missiles out of parts of Europe and Turkey. Like, that was the Russian demand. They never talk about that part. We actually met their demands in order to get them to pull their missiles out of Cuba. So we could have done a Cuban Missile Crisis. There's no reason we could not have said, okay, we're not going to expand up to your borders. We can see that's provocative. We'll pull back our missiles. According to, it's not clear if this is true, but some claim that Russia at one point actually said, well, why do you still, after Putin had taken over, why do you still need NATO? What do you need it for? NATO was set up for the Cold War. And supposedly he was told, no, I mean, it's just a defense alliance. And supposedly Putin said, well, so can we join? Can Russia join NATO? Oh, we can't? Well, then it kind of seems like it's about us.
Right.
You know? Which clearly it is. Like, why did we maintain NATO after the Cold War? Some of our younger listeners might not, directly remember this, but there was this moment after the collapse of the Soviet Union where there was a lot of positivity. There was a lot of optimism. The Russian people have never been so pro-America or pro-US as they were at that moment. This all could have gone down differently. It all could have gone down differently. And we had to be scumbags. We had to go. We had to manipulate their elections. We had to treat them like our fucking, our new pet. And this is what you get. You can't treat people who had an empire 5 minutes ago that way and not think they're going to prop up a strong man, especially when that's the whole history of their country, is to follow a strong man. That you really wanted Russia to be a democracy. We needed to show them that was a viable path for them, and they weren't just going to wind up a tool of the United States.
Right. Exactly.
And that's not what we did. So now here we are. Yeah, Putin is the aggressor. Obviously, nobody here saying, well, good for him. I like his horsemanship. He's a strong leader, nobody's saying that, but it didn't have to go down this way. It didn't have to go down like this. And now that we're here, it's a very dangerous situation.